The summer heat in Phoenix, Arizona, was unforgiving that Tuesday morning in late June. Sarah Martinez wiped the sweat from her forehead as she stood in front of the rusted 1987 Chevrolet Caprice sitting in the impound lot on 27th Avenue. The temperature had already climbed past 100 degrees, and it wasn't even noon yet. The asphalt beneath her work boots felt soft, sticky, like it might melt at any moment. She had been standing in the sun for 20 minutes, waiting for the auction to start, and her throat was dry despite the bottle of water she had drained on the drive over. The car looked like it had been abandoned for years, maybe decades. Faded blue paint was peeling off in chunks, revealing rust and primer underneath. The tires were so flat, they seemed to melt into the cracked asphalt, and both the front and rear windshields had spiderweb cracks spreading across them. One of the side mirrors dangled by a wire, and the front bumper was held on with what looked like coat hangers. It was a disaster, a complete wreck, the kind of car most people would have crushed for scrap metal without a second thought. But Sarah Martinez didn't see trash. She saw possibility. She saw parts that could be salvaged, components that could be cleaned and resold, maybe even an engine block that could be rebuilt. She had come to this impound lot looking for exactly this kind of opportunity, a cheap source of parts for her small auto repair shop on the east side of town, Martinez Auto Repair. Business had been slow lately. Competition from the big chain stores was crushing her, and she needed to find ways to cut costs wherever she could. What she found instead, hidden inside that rust bucket, would change her life in ways she could never have imagined. If you're enjoying this story, please hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us bring you more incredible true stories like this one. Sarah had been working as a mechanic for 12 years, ever since she dropped out of Arizona State University halfway through her junior year to help her mother pay the medical bills after her father's massive stroke. She had been studying business administration, had dreams of maybe opening her own company someday, of building something that mattered. But life had other plans. Her father, Roberto Martinez, had worked construction for 30 years, building half the strip malls and office buildings in the Phoenix metro area. He never complained, never took a sick day, provided for his family with pride and dignity. Then, one morning, while getting ready for work, he collapsed in the bathroom. The stroke left him paralyzed on his left side, unable to work, unable to do most of the things he had always done for himself. The medical bills came fast and relentless. Even with insurance, the co-pays and deductibles and out-of-network charges added up to tens of thousands of dollars. Physical therapy, medications, home modifications to make the house wheelchair accessible. Sarah's mother, Elena, worked as a housekeeper at a resort in Scottsdale, but her income barely covered the mortgage and groceries. Sarah's younger sister was still in high school. There was no choice, really. Sarah dropped out of college, got a job as an apprentice mechanic at a shop in Tempe, and started learning the trade. She discovered she had a gift for it. Cars made sense to her in a way that textbooks never had. She could listen to an engine and hear what was wrong, could diagnose problems that stumped mechanics with twice her experience. She worked long hours, took on side jobs on weekends, saved every penny she could. After 5 years, she had saved enough to open her own shop, a tiny one-bay garage in a rough neighborhood where the rent was cheap. Martinez Auto Repair. Her father came to the grand opening in his wheelchair, tears in his eyes, proud of his daughter, even if this wasn't the path either of them had imagined for her. That was 7 years ago. The shop had grown a little, expanded to 3 bays, built a loyal customer base in the neighborhood, but it was always a struggle. Big chains like Pep Boys and Jiffy Lube offered faster service and lower prices, even if the quality wasn't as good. Sarah's customers were mostly working-class folks, people who needed their cars to get to work but didn't have much money to spend on repairs. She tried to be fair, to charge what was reasonable, to work with people when they couldn't pay right away. It meant her profit margins were thin, meant there were months when she barely broke even. The rent on her building had just gone up by $300 a month, and she wasn't sure how she was going to manage it. She needed parts, cheap parts, and the city impound auction was the best place to find them. The Caprice was listed at $400 in the auction catalogue. Sarah had circled it with a pen, studying the brief description. 1987. Chevrolet Caprice, blue, non-running, sold as is. No mention of why it was there, how long it had been impounded, or what condition it was really in. Just those few words and a lot number. Nobody else at the auction seemed interested. Most of the other bidders were targeting newer vehicles, cars from the 2000s that might actually be worth restoring and reselling. The Caprice was too old, too damaged, too much work for too little return. It was a rust bucket, a complete disaster. But Sarah saw potential in ways others didn't. The engine might be salvageable if the block wasn't cracked. Maybe the alternator still worked. Definitely, some of the electrical components could be pulled and reused. Even if she only got $200 worth of parts out of it, she would still come out ahead. She raised her bidding paddle with a mix of hope and pragmatism, $400. It was most of what she had budgeted for parts that month, but if the gamble paid off, it would be worth it. Going once, the auctioneer called out in his rapid-fire cadence. Going twice. Sarah held her breath, waiting to see if anyone else would bid, but the crowd remained silent. Sold to number 73. Sarah's number. She paid cash at the window, counting out 4 crisp $100 bills from her wallet, signed the paperwork with hands that were steady despite her nervousness, and arranged for the car to be towed to her shop the next morning. Her assistant, Marcus, a 23-year-old kid who had been working with her for 2 years, shook his head when he saw it arrive. "This thing is beyond help, Sarah. It's not even worth scrapping." But Sarah wasn't planning to restore it. She just wanted the parts. They pushed it into Bay 3, and she grabbed her toolbox. The interior of the Caprice smelled like mildew and old cigarettes, with an underlying odor of decay that made Sarah's nose wrinkle. The dashboard was cracked and faded from years of sun exposure through the windshield. The seats were torn in multiple places, springs poking through the fabric like broken bones through skin. Fast food wrappers from restaurants that didn't even exist anymore littered the floor. Old newspapers from 2023 were stuffed in the door pockets. Whoever had owned this car had lived in it, or at least spent a lot of time in it. Sarah started with the dashboard, carefully removing the radio panel and disconnecting the wiring. Each wire was brittle, the plastic coating cracked and flaking. She worked methodically, the way she always did, photographing each connection before she disconnected it so she could remember how things went back together. Marcus worked on the passenger side, pulling out the glove compartment and center console. They worked in comfortable silence, the only sounds being the clink of tools against metal and the distant hum of traffic on Van Buren Street outside. The shop's ancient oscillating fan pushed hot air around without really cooling anything. It was Marcus who first noticed something strange. He had been prying at the back seat, trying to detach it from its mounting points, when his screwdriver slipped and punched through the panel behind it. "Hey, Sarah, this panel behind the back seat doesn't look original. Come look at this." Sarah set down her wrench and crawled into the back seat, her knees creaking as she squeezed into the cramped space. Marcus was right. The panel was made of newer plywood, not the original particle board and vinyl that the rest of the interior used. And there were Phillips head screws holding it in place, the kind you could buy at any hardware store, not the rusted factory bolts with the specialized heads that you'd expect in a car this old. She grabbed a screwdriver from her tool belt and started removing the screws. One by one, they came out easily, too easily. They had been installed recently, maybe within the last few years. She pulled the panel away, and her breath caught in her throat. Behind the panel was a space that shouldn't exist, a carefully constructed hollow area that had been carved out of the back seat support structure. And that space was filled, completely packed, with something wrapped in layers of plastic and duct tape. She pulled out one of the packages. It was heavy, dense. She peeled back the duct tape and plastic. Underneath was money, cash. Stacks and stacks of $100 bills. Marcus stumbled backward, his tool belt catching on the doorframe. Holy hell, Sarah. Is that what I think it is? Sarah's hands were shaking as she held the bundle. She couldn't speak. Her mind had gone blank, unable to process what she was seeing. This wasn't real. This couldn't be real, but the weight of the money in her hands was solid, undeniable. She pulled out another package. Same thing. $100 bills, wrapped tight, bound with rubber bands. She looked back into the hollow space. There were dozens more packages, maybe hundreds. The entire space was packed with them. They spent the next hour carefully removing every bundle from the hidden compartment, working with shaking hands and racing hearts. Each package was the same, tightly wrapped, carefully sealed. They laid them out on the shop floor in rows, organizing them by size and weight. When they were done pulling out the last package, they just stood there, staring at the mountain of cash that covered most of the floor of Bay 3. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed and flickered. Outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the grimy windows. Marcus was the first to speak, his voice barely above a whisper. "How much do you think this is?" Sarah's mind was racing, trying to calculate, trying to make sense of it. "I don't know. Millions, maybe. We need to count it. We need to figure out exactly what we're dealing with here." They locked the shop doors and pulled down the metal security shutters that Sarah rarely used. She closed all the blinds, checked them twice to make sure no one could see inside. Then they turned off the lights in the front office and turned on just the work lights over Bay 3, the ones they used when doing detail work that required good visibility. For the rest of that day and well into the night, they counted. Bundle after bundle, stack after stack, they unwrapped each package carefully, counted the bills inside, recorded the amount in a notebook, then re-wrapped it. Most bundles contained exactly $100,000 in $100 bills. Some contained $50,000. A few smaller ones contained $20,000 or $30,000. Sarah's fingers cramped from counting bills. She had to stop every hour to rest her hands, to rub feeling back into her fingers. Marcus made coffee around midnight, the strongest brew they had, and they kept working. They didn't talk much. What was there to say? Every bundle they counted made the situation more surreal, more impossible to process. By 2 in the morning, they had counted $20 million. By 3, they had reached $30 million. Sarah kept double-checking her math, certain she must be making a mistake. But the numbers didn't lie. Bundle after bundle of cash, neatly packed, carefully hidden, waiting for someone who never came back for it. By 4 in the morning, they had their final count, $39,200,000. Sarah wrote the number in her notebook and underlined it 3 times. She sat down hard on her rolling mechanic stool, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. Her whole body felt numb, disconnected, like she was floating somewhere above herself, watching this happen to someone else. Marcus paced back and forth in the small space between the workbenches, running his hands through his hair over and over again, a nervous habit he had when he was stressed. "This is insane. This is absolutely insane, Sarah. What are we supposed to do with this? I mean, what do people even do when they find this much money? Do we call the cops? Do we call a lawyer? Do we just load it in your truck and drive to Mexico?" Sarah rubbed her face with both hands, trying to wake herself up, trying to make her brain work. She was exhausted, running on adrenaline and caffeine, and she needed to think clearly. This was the most important decision she would ever make, and she knew it. Whatever they decided to do in the next few hours would determine the rest of their lives. Keep the money, and they might be rich, but they'd also be criminals. Turn it in, and they might be safe, but they'd lose the chance at a life-changing fortune. There had to be a right answer, but she couldn't see it through the fog of exhaustion and shock. The first question they needed to answer was obvious but terrifying. Where did this money come from? And more importantly, who did it belong to? Sarah forced herself to stand up and walk to the small office at the front of the shop where she had left the paperwork from the impound auction. Her legs felt weak, unsteady, like she had just run a marathon. She spread the documents out on her desk and examined them under the harsh light of the desk lamp. According to the impound records, the Caprice had been towed from a long-term parking lot at Sky Harbor International Airport 3 months ago, on March 15th. The registered owner was listed as Michael David Brennan, with an address in Scottsdale, 8847 East Indian School Road, apartment 342. The car had been sitting in that airport parking lot for over 2 years, the impound notice said. 2 full years, just sitting there, accumulating unpaid parking fees that eventually totaled more than $5,000. The parking lot owners had finally contacted the city to have it towed. According to the notes on the file, they had tried to contact the registered owner multiple times at the address on file, but no one had responded. No one had come to claim the car. It was as if Michael Brennan had simply vanished into thin air. Sarah sat down at her computer and opened Google. She typed in Michael Brennan, Phoenix, Arizona. The search returned thousands of results, but nothing useful. The name was too common. She tried adding Scottsdale. Still too many results. She tried searching for the specific address. It came up as the Pinnacle Heights Apartments, a luxury complex near Old Town Scottsdale. She pulled up the apartment complex's website. The rent started at $3,000 a month for a 1-bedroom. This was not a place where struggling people lived. Whoever Michael Brennan was, he had money. Or at least, he had money before he abandoned a car containing $39 million in cash at the airport. She searched for Michael Brennan embezzlement. Nothing relevant. Michael Brennan fraud. Nothing. Michael Brennan missing person. Still nothing that matched. Whoever this person was, he wasn't famous, hadn't been in the news, at least not under that name. Sarah sat back in her chair and stared at the ceiling. The paint was peeling in one corner, something she kept meaning to fix but never got around to. Her mind was racing through possibilities. This much money didn't come from legitimate sources. You didn't hide $39 million in a car panel if you had earned it honestly. This was dirty money, drug money maybe, or money from some kind of fraud or theft. And whoever had hidden it was either dead, in prison, or on the run. Otherwise, they would have come back for it by now. The second question was harder and more personal. Should they call the police? Everything in Sarah's upbringing told her that yes, they should call the police immediately. This wasn't their money. It belonged to someone, even if that someone was a criminal. The right thing to do, the legal thing to do, was to report it and let the authorities handle it. But Marcus had a different perspective, one shaped by very different life experiences. He grew up in the Maryvale neighborhood of South Phoenix, an area that had some of the highest crime rates in the city. His mother had worked 2 jobs to keep him and his 2 siblings fed and housed. His older brother, Tommy, had been arrested when Marcus was 15, charged with armed robbery of a convenience store. Tommy had always maintained his innocence, said he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, that the police had arrested him because he matched the description of the suspect, blackmail, early 20s, and they needed to close the case. Tommy got sent away for 5 years. When he got out, he was a different person, harder, angrier, unable to find work because of his record. He died 2 years later in a motorcycle accident, and Marcus had always believed that prison had killed his brother, just slowly instead of all at once. Marcus had his own encounters with the police growing up, stopped and searched for walking in the wrong neighborhood, detained for riding his bike near a house that had been burglarized, questioned about a fight he hadn't been part of. He had never been arrested, never been charged with anything, but the experiences had left him with a deep distrust of the system. So when Sarah said they should call the police, Marcus pushed back hard. What if they just take it? What if they accuse us of stealing it? We bought the car legally, Sarah. We have the paperwork to prove it. That makes it our car, and everything in it is legally ours. That's how property law works, right? Finders keepers. This could change our lives. Your mum's medical debt would be gone. You could expand the shop, maybe open a second location. I could finally go to college, get my engineering degree like I always wanted. This money could do so much good for us, for our families, for everyone we care about. Why should we just hand it over to the government? They'll probably just seize it, and it'll disappear into some evidence locker forever. Nobody benefits from that. Sarah wanted to believe him. God, how she wanted to believe that they could just keep the money, that it was that simple, that easy. But she knew better. She knew that life didn't work that way. You don't find $39 million in cash and just keep it without consequences. If the money was connected to organized crime, the people who lost it would come looking for it. They would be ruthless, violent, willing to do whatever it took to get it back. And if the money was evidence in some criminal investigation, the police would eventually trace it back to them. They would be charged with theft, conspiracy, money laundering, who knows what else. The fantasy of keeping the money fell apart the moment you thought about it seriously. Sarah knew that wasn't how it worked, knew that property law was far more complicated than finders keepers, but she also understood Marcus's fear and hope. The truth was, she was scared too. Scared of the police, asking too many questions about why she happened to buy this particular car. Scared of whoever had hidden this money showing up to reclaim it. Scared of making the wrong choice and destroying her life, her business, everything she had worked so hard to build. So they compromised in the worst possible way. They did nothing. They locked the money in the storage room at the back of the shop, a windowless concrete room where Sarah kept old parts and supplies. They covered the bundles with old tires, broken engine blocks, and greasy tarps. They locked the door with a heavy padlock and went home. But they couldn't just go back to normal life and pretend nothing had happened. The money was like a living thing, a presence in the shop that Sarah couldn't ignore. Every time the bell above the front door rang as a customer walked in, her heart would jump into her throat. She would look up expecting to see men in suits, or worse, men with guns, demanding to know where the money was. Every time a car slowed down in front of the building, she would glance up nervously through the front window, watching until it passed. At night, lying in bed in her small apartment, she would stare at the ceiling for hours, unable to sleep, her mind racing through scenarios. What if someone broke into the shop? What if Marcus told someone? What if the police found out and came with a warrant? The weight of the secret was crushing, making it hard to breathe, hard to think about anything else. Marcus was handling it differently. He seemed almost excited, energized by the secret. He started talking about what he would do with his share of the money if they kept it. He would quit the shop, go back to school, study mechanical engineering like he had always wanted to. He would buy his mother a house, something nice in a safe neighborhood, not like the apartment in Maryvale, where she had raised 3 kids alone. He would travel, see the world, all the places he had only seen in pictures. He talked about it constantly, as if saying it out loud would make it real, would make the decision to keep the money inevitable. Sarah tried to share his enthusiasm, tried to let herself imagine what she could do with her share, but the fear was too strong. The money felt wrong, tainted, dangerous. 3 days passed in this strange limbo. 3 days of jumping at shadows, of checking the locks on the storage room door a dozen times a day, of lying to customers about why she seemed distracted. On the 4th day, everything changed. Sarah was under the hood of a Ford F-150, replacing a timing belt, when she heard the bell above the door chime. She called out that she would be right there, finished tightening the bolt she was working on, and grabbed a rag to wipe the grease off her hands as she walked to the front of the shop. The man standing in the waiting area didn't look like her usual customers. He was in his 50s, well-dressed in crisp khaki pants and a pressed polo shirt with some kind of logo on the breast pocket. He wore expensive sunglasses pushed up on his head, revealing sharp eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the shop. His shoes were leather loafers that had never seen dirt, completely wrong for standing in an auto repair shop. He looked like a lawyer, or a salesman, or maybe a detective. "Can I help you?" Sarah asked, trying to keep her voice steady, trying not to show the sudden spike of fear that made her hands shake slightly. The man smiled, but it was a professional smile, empty of warmth, the kind of smile that salespeople and politicians use. "I'm looking for a car," he said. His voice was smooth, controlled, the voice of someone used to getting what they wanted. "A Chevrolet Caprice, 1987 model year, blue in color. I understand you recently purchased such a vehicle from the city impound auction. I'd like to discuss it with you." Sarah's blood ran cold. Her first instinct was to lie, to say she didn't know what he was talking about, but she forced herself to stay calm. The purchase was public record. There was no point in denying it. "Who are you?" she asked, buying time, trying to think. The man reached into his pocket and pulled out a business card, extending it to her between 2 fingers. "Robert Chen, Private Investigations," the card read, with a Phoenix phone number and an email address. No company name, no office address. "I'm a private investigator," Mr. Chen said, as if that explained everything. "I've been hired by a client to locate certain property that may have been in that vehicle. My client is willing to be very generous in exchange for the return of this property. No questions asked, no complications, simply a transaction between reasonable people." Sarah looked at the card, then back at the man. Her mind was racing. How did he know? How did he find her so fast? She had only bought the car 4 days ago. She and Marcus had been so careful not to tell anyone. "What kind of property are you talking about?" she asked, though she already knew the answer. Mr. Chen's smile widened slightly. "Let's not play games, Ms. Martinez. Time is valuable for both of us. I think you know exactly what I'm referring to. My client is willing to pay you 10% of what was in that car as a finder's fee. That's more than fair, I think you'll agree. 10% for simply returning what doesn't belong to you." 10% of $39 million was $3.9 million. Sarah's heart was pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. That was more money than she had ever imagined having. More than enough to solve all her problems, pay off all her debts, secure her future. But accepting it meant dealing with whoever Mr. Chen represented, meant getting involved in something criminal, meant crossing a line she could never uncross. And what if 10% wasn't enough? What if these people decided they didn't want to pay anything at all, that it was easier to just take the money and eliminate anyone who knew about it? "Who's your client?" Sarah asked. Mr. Chen shook his head slowly. "That information is confidential, but I can assure you they are serious people. People with resources, people who don't appreciate being inconvenienced." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Sarah felt Marcus come up behind her. He must have heard the conversation from the back of the shop. He crossed his arms, trying to look tough, but Sarah could see the fear in his eyes. "And what if we don't have what you're looking for?" Marcus said. "What if the car was empty when we got it?" Mr. Chen turned to look at Marcus, and his expression hardened, the professional facade slipping for just a moment to reveal something cold and dangerous underneath. Then, I would advise you both to look very carefully. Check every panel, every seat, every possible hiding place, because my client is not someone you want to disappoint." He turned back to Sarah. "You have 48 hours to consider this offer. After that, my client may pursue other methods of recovery, less friendly methods. I'll be in touch." He walked out without waiting for a response, the bell above the door chiming cheerfully as he left. Sarah and Marcus looked at each other after the door closed behind Robert Chen. Neither of them spoke for a long moment. The silence was heavy, oppressive. Finally, Sarah broke it. "We need to call the police right now, before this gets any worse. We're in over our heads, Marcus. These aren't people we can deal with on our own." Marcus started to protest, but Sarah cut him off. "No, listen to me. Whoever that man works for, they're criminals, serious criminals. The kind of people who threaten and hurt people to get what they want. We can't keep this money. Even if we wanted to, we can't, because if we try, we'll end up dead or in prison. There's no scenario where we keep this money and live happily ever after. That only happens in movies." Marcus sat down on the rolling stool, his head in his hands. "I know," he said quietly. "I know you're right. I just wanted to believe that maybe, just this once, things could work out for us. That we could catch a break, you know. But you're right. We have to call the police." Sarah put her hand on his shoulder. "We'll get through this. Whatever happens, we'll figure it out together. But we have to do the right thing, not because we'll be rewarded for it, but because it's the only choice we can live with." They called the non-emergency police line and asked to speak to someone about found property. The dispatcher seemed confused by the request and transferred them to the Property Crimes Division. That detective told them this sounded more like a financial crimes matter and transferred them again. They were transferred twice more before finally reaching Detective Linda Vasquez with the Phoenix Police Department Financial Crimes Unit. Detective Vasquez had a no-nonsense voice that suggested she had heard every story and seen every scam in her 20 years on the force. She listened to Sarah's story without interrupting. When Sarah finished, there was a long pause. "How much money are we talking about?" Detective Vasquez asked. Sarah took a deep breath. $39,200,000. Another pause, longer this time. "That's a lot of money, Ms. Martinez. Can you come down to the police station today? Bring all the paperwork for the car purchase, any documentation you have. And don't touch the money, don't move it, don't tell anyone else about it. I'll have officers come to secure your shop until we can arrange to transfer the money to the evidence facility." Sarah and Marcus spent the rest of that afternoon and evening at the downtown Phoenix police station. They were separated and interviewed individually in small grey rooms that smelled like old coffee and industrial cleaning products. Sarah told her story half a dozen times to different detectives, going over every detail. "When did you buy the car? What time did you discover the money? Did anyone else know about it? Did you touch it? Did you count it? Did anyone contact you about it?" She answered every question honestly, including the part about Robert Chen and his visit. She gave them his business card. They photographed it, bagged it as evidence. Detective Vasquez was professional but skeptical throughout the interview. Her questions were pointed, designed to catch inconsistencies, to find holes in the story. She made it very clear that Sarah and Marcus were not heroes for turning in the money, that they were simply doing what they were legally required to do, and that if the investigation revealed any evidence that they had stolen the money or were involved in the original crime, they would be charged accordingly. Sarah and Marcus were not under arrest, but they weren't free to leave either. They were somewhere in between, witnesses or suspects, depending on how the investigation unfolded. It was after midnight when they were finally allowed to go home. 2 police officers followed them back to the shop to secure the storage room and begin the process of documenting and removing the money. Sarah watched as they carried out bundle after bundle, counting each one, photographing it, sealing it in evidence bags. It took 4 hours to remove all of it. When they were done, the storage room looked empty and sad. Just old tires and broken parts, no fortune hidden in the corners. Sarah felt a strange sense of relief mixed with loss. The money had been a burden, a source of fear and stress, but it had also been possibility, hope, a chance at a different life. Now it was gone, and she was back where she had started, struggling to keep her shop afloat, worried about bills and rent and the future. The investigation moved quickly after that. Detective Vasquez kept Sarah updated, partly because Sarah was a witness and partly Sarah suspected because the detective wanted to make sure Sarah didn't have second thoughts and try to flee or go into hiding. Within 48 hours, the Phoenix PD had connected the money to an active FBI investigation into a massive embezzlement scheme. The FBI had been tracking the case for 3 years, Detective Vasquez explained during a follow-up meeting at the station. They had a task force dedicated to it, agents in multiple states, forensic accountants going through thousands of documents. The registered owner of the Caprice, Michael David Brennan, had been the chief financial officer of a real estate investment company called Pinnacle Capital Management, based in Scottsdale. For over a decade, he had been in charge of managing investments for wealthy clients, handling their money, making real estate deals on their behalf. But starting around 2018, he had begun stealing from the clients. It was sophisticated and carefully planned. He would create fake companies that existed only on paper, then write checks from client accounts to these fake companies for fictitious services or property purchases. He would then transfer the money through multiple accounts to hide the trail before eventually moving it offshore or converting it to cash. By the time the fraud was discovered in early 2023, Brennan had stolen over $50 million from more than 24 clients. Some of them were retired people who had trusted Brennan with their life savings. Some were small businesses that had invested profits they couldn't afford to lose. The FBI had frozen his known bank accounts, seized his assets, charged him with wire fraud, money laundering, and securities fraud. But Brennan had disappeared before he could be arrested. The FBI believed he had fled the country, probably to a place without an extradition treaty with the United States. They had been searching for him for 2 years, with no success. The money in the car appeared to be part of Brennan's escape plan, Detective Vasquez explained. He had probably been converting stolen funds to cash over time, hiding it in the car as his emergency stash, money he could access if he needed to run. But something had gone wrong. Maybe he got spooked and left the country faster than he planned. Maybe he intended to come back for the money later, but couldn't risk returning to the United States. Or maybe he died overseas, and the secret of the money died with him. They might never know the full story. What mattered now was returning the money to the people Brennan had stolen from. The investors who had been defrauded were contacted by the FBI and informed that a significant portion of their stolen money had been recovered. Sarah learned that some of these people had lost their entire retirement savings, everything they had worked their whole lives to accumulate. Others had been forced to sell their homes, declare bankruptcy, start over from nothing in their 60s and 70s. The recovery of $39 million wouldn't make all of them whole, but it would help. It was something when they had thought everything was lost. But the legal process for distributing the recovered funds was incredibly complicated. There were insurance companies that had paid out claims to some of the victims and now wanted to be reimbursed. There were bankruptcy trustees representing Brennan's estate, trying to claw back money for creditors. There were state and federal agencies seeking fines and penalties. There were liens and judgments from civil lawsuits. Everyone wanted a piece of the recovered money, and determining who had the strongest legal claim would require months of hearings and negotiations. In the meantime, the money was held in a federal evidence facility, and Sarah went back to her regular life. But everything had changed in ways both obvious and subtle. The shop was busier than ever, but not because she had more legitimate customers. Word had spread about the car and the money, and people would stop by just to see the place where it had happened, to meet the mechanic who had found $39 million. Some days, Sarah felt like a tourist attraction. People would take photos of the shop, ask her to pose with them, want to hear the story again and again. News crews came by in the first few weeks, local stations doing feel-good stories about the honest mechanic who turned in the fortune. Sarah hated it, hated being in the spotlight, hated having her privacy invaded. She had always valued her anonymity, her ability to just be a regular person doing regular work. Now she was something else, someone people recognized, someone they had opinions about. The private investigator, Robert Chen, never came back to the shop. Detective Vasquez told Sarah that he had been questioned by federal agents and had refused to identify his client, citing confidentiality agreements. He had hired a lawyer who claimed that Chen had been conducting a legitimate investigation on behalf of a client who wished to remain anonymous, that he had made no threats, that he had simply inquired about property that might have been in the vehicle. Without evidence of a crime or a willing witness to testify about the implied threats, there was nothing the authorities could do. Detective Vasquez suspected that Chen might have been working for someone connected to the embezzlement, perhaps one of Brennan's associates who had been cut out of the scheme, or someone who knew about the money and wanted to claim it before it was officially recovered. But suspicions weren't proof, and Chen had disappeared from view, his phone number disconnected, his business address revealed to be a mailbox rental. Sarah installed an expensive security system at the shop, cameras on every corner, capturing every angle, motion sensors on all the doors and windows, reinforced locks that would take a professional burglar significant time to defeat. She started carrying pepper spray in her purse, kept a baseball bat behind the counter in the front office. She varied her route home every day, checked her rearview mirror compulsively for cars that might be following her. The money had brought attention she didn't want, and she lived with a constant low-level anxiety that someone dangerous might decide she knew more than she did, that she had kept some of the money for herself, that she was a loose end that needed to be eliminated. Marcus felt the same way. They talked about it sometimes, late at night after closing up the shop, sharing their fears and trying to reassure each other that they had done the right thing. 5 months after finding the money, Sarah received a certified letter from the U.S. District Court in Phoenix. There would be a hearing to determine the distribution of the recovered funds, and Sarah and Marcus were required to attend as witnesses and interested parties. The letter included a date, time and courtroom number, and a warning that failure to appear could result in contempt charges. Sarah felt her stomach drop when she read it. She had been hoping that the whole thing would just resolve itself without any more involvement from her, that she could just move on with her life. But apparently, it wasn't going to be that simple. The hearing was held on a Tuesday morning in September, almost 6 months to the day after Sarah had bought the Caprice at the impound auction. The federal courthouse in downtown Phoenix was an imposing modern building of glass and steel that seemed designed to make people feel small and insignificant. Sarah and Marcus arrived early, both of them dressed in their best clothes, feeling awkward and out of place among the lawyers in expensive suits who crowded the hallways. They found the courtroom and sat in the back, watching as it slowly filled up with people. Lawyers representing the defrauded investors, lawyers for the insurance companies, federal prosecutors, FBI agents. A court reporter setting up her equipment, armed bailiffs standing at attention near the judge's bench. The judge entered precisely at 9 o'clock, and everyone stood. She was a stern-looking woman in her 60s, with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun and reading glasses hanging from a chain around her neck. She took her seat, instructed everyone else to sit, and began the proceedings without preamble. She sounded tired, like she had presided over too many of these complicated financial cases and was ready to retire. Over the next 3 hours, Sarah watched as lawyer after lawyer stood up and made arguments about why their client deserved a portion of the recovered money. The victim investors, represented by a class action attorney, argued that they were the primary victims and should be made whole before anyone else received anything. The insurance companies argued that they had paid out millions in claims and should be reimbursed. The government argued that substantial fines and penalties were owed for Brennan's crimes. Nobody seemed to care that Sarah and Marcus were in the room, except for when the judge asked them a few perfunctory questions. Did you purchase the vehicle legally? Yes. Did you discover the money while taking apart the vehicle for parts? Yes. Did you immediately report it to the authorities when contacted by the private investigator? Yes. The judge nodded and made some notes. Sarah got the impression that the judge saw them as minor footnotes to the case, not particularly important in the grand scheme of things. After the questioning, they sat in silence while the lawyers continued their arguments, using terms and citing cases that Sarah didn't understand. It felt surreal, watching people argue over money she had found, money she had never wanted, money that had brought her nothing but stress and fear. After lunch, the judge called for a recess to review the filings and consider her decision. Sarah and Marcus waited in the hallway, too nervous to go far, drinking bad coffee from a vending machine and watching lawyers huddle in small groups, whispering strategies. Marcus kept checking his watch, bouncing his knee up and down, clearly anxious. Sarah tried to stay calm, but her heart was racing. Whatever the judge decided in the next hour would determine their future, whether they walked away with nothing or with something that could change their lives. When the judge returned, the courtroom fell silent. She read from her decision, explaining the legal reasoning in language that was mostly incomprehensible to Sarah, but that seemed to satisfy the lawyers. The bulk of the money, approximately $34 million, would go to the defrauded investors to be distributed proportionally based on their losses. The insurance companies would receive approximately $3 million in reimbursement for the claims they had paid out. The federal government would receive approximately $1,700,000 in fines and penalties. And Sarah Martinez and Marcus Thompson, as the finders of the money and in recognition of their honesty in reporting it to authorities, would receive a finder's reward of 5% of the total recovered amount, which came to $1,960,000 to be split equally between them. Sarah felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. For a moment she thought she might faint. Her vision tunneled, sounds became muffled and distant. $980,000, almost $1 million. It was more money than she had ever imagined having, more than she could have saved in 10 lifetimes working at the shop. Marcus grabbed her hand under the table, squeezed it so hard it hurt, his eyes wide with disbelief. The judge continued speaking, explaining that the reward was being granted in recognition of their honesty and cooperation with the investigation, that they could have chosen to hide the money or flee with it, but had instead done the right thing. The judge emphasized that this decision should serve as an example that honesty is rewarded, even in cases involving substantial sums of money. Sarah started crying right there in the courtroom, tears streaming down her face, her whole body shaking with relief and disbelief and gratitude and the release of 6 months of accumulated stress and fear. Marcus was crying too, trying to hide it, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. They had done the right thing, even when it had been terrifying and uncertain, and it had actually worked out. They were being rewarded for their honesty, for their integrity, for choosing to be the kind of people who do what's right, even when it costs them. The money changed everything, but not in the ways Sarah had expected. It didn't happen all at once. The actual transfer of funds took another 3 months, paperwork and legal procedures and verification processes. But knowing it was coming gave Sarah a sense of security she had never experienced before. For the first time in her adult life, she wasn't afraid of the future. The first thing Sarah did when the money finally arrived in her bank account was call her mother. Elena Martinez was 72 years old and still cleaning hotel rooms at the Scottsdale Resort, still working 40 hours a week despite the arthritis in her hands. Sarah drove to her mother's small apartment that afternoon. She made tea, sat her mother down at the kitchen table, and told her that all of her medical debt was paid off. Every penny. The hospital bills from her father's stroke, the credit card debt from covering expenses insurance wouldn't pay, the personal loans from family members, all of it gone. Her mother stared at her, not understanding. "What do you mean? How?" Sarah explained about the car, about the money, about the court case and the reward. Her mother listened in silence, tears slowly rolling down her cheeks. When Sarah finished, her mother stood up and pulled Sarah into a hug, holding her so tight Sarah could barely breathe. "Your father would be so proud of you," she said, "not because of the money, but because you did what was right. You are a good person, Mia." Sarah paid off her mother's debts that week, then gave her mother another gift. She bought her a small house in a quiet neighborhood in Tempe, near Sarah's shop. It wasn't fancy, just a modest 2-bedroom bungalow with a small yard, but it was clean and safe, and her mother's own. Her mother could work if she wanted to, but she didn't have to. She could finally rest. Then she paid off the loans on her shop, the building, the equipment. She gave Marcus half of her share as promised, and he used it to enroll in community college to study mechanical engineering. Sarah expanded Martinez Auto Repair, hiring 3 more mechanics and doubling the size of the building. She started a program to train young people from her neighborhood in auto repair, giving them the skills and opportunities she had fought so hard to find for herself. But the money also brought complications that Sarah hadn't anticipated. Within a month of the news spreading that she had received almost $1 million, old friends she hadn't heard from in years suddenly reappeared. A high school classmate she barely remembered sent her a long Facebook message about how they had always been such good friends and how she was starting a business and could really use an investment. A cousin she had met maybe twice at family gatherings called to say his daughter needed help with college tuition, and Sarah had always been his favorite relative. An ex-boyfriend from 10 years ago messaged to say he was going through a tough time and remembered how kind and generous Sarah had always been. Family members expected her to solve all their financial problems. An uncle asked her to co-sign a loan for a new truck. An aunt wanted money for her son's wedding. Her sister's husband asked for help with his failing restaurant. Every family gathering became uncomfortable, people looking at her with expectation, dropping hints about bills they couldn't pay or opportunities they couldn't afford. When she said no, which she had to do more often than not, people got angry. They called her selfish, said the money had changed her, accused her of forgetting where she came from and who had helped her along the way. People in the neighborhood looked at her differently too. Some with admiration and respect, happy for her success, but others with envy and resentment. A few regular customers stopped coming to her shop, saying they couldn't afford her anymore even though her prices hadn't changed. Rumors started that she was charging more now that she was rich, that she had gotten greedy, that she only cared about high-paying customers. None of it was true, but the rumors spread anyway. She had to work twice as hard to prove that she was still the same person, still fair, still honest, still committed to serving her community. She learned to be very careful about who she told about the money. She learned to guard her privacy, to not talk about her finances with anyone except Marcus and her mother. She learned to say no firmly but kindly, to set boundaries, to protect herself from people who saw her as a resource to be exploited rather than a person to be respected. The experience had taught her something important. Money solved some problems but created others. It could pay off debt and provide security, but it couldn't buy genuine relationships or protect you from people's expectations and judgment. What mattered most wasn't the money itself, but how you chose to use it and who you chose to become because of it. A year after the hearing, Sarah was working late one evening when a car pulled up outside the shop. An old pickup truck, rusted and dented, steam pouring from under the hood. A young woman got out, maybe 25, with two small children in car seats in the back. She looked exhausted and worried. The woman explained that her truck had overheated on the highway, that she was trying to get to her mother's house across town, that she didn't have much money, but she needed help. Sarah looked at the truck, then at the woman's tired face, at the children sleeping in the back seat. She saw herself, years ago, desperate and struggling, trying to keep everything together on her own. She told the woman to wait in the office, got her some water and snacks for the kids when they woke up. Then she opened the hood of the truck and got to work. The radiator was shot, needed to be replaced. She had one in stock. She installed it, checked the belts and hoses, topped off all the fluids. When she was done, she went to the office where the woman was waiting anxiously. The woman asked how much she owed. Sarah handed her the keys. No charge. The radiator's old, but it should get you where you need to go. Drive safely. The woman stared at her, confused. I don't understand. You just spent hours working on my truck. Sarah smiled. Sometimes people just need a break. Pay it forward when you can. That's enough. The woman left in tears, hugging Sarah before she drove away. Marcus had watched the whole thing from across the shop. You know you can't fix everyone's problems, right? He said. Sarah shrugged. I know, but I can fix this one. That's enough for today. She realized then that the real value of what she had found wasn't the money itself. It was the freedom to make choices, to help people when she wanted to build something meaningful. The money had given her that freedom, but it was what she chose to do with it that mattered. Michael Brennan was never found. Detective Vasquez kept Sarah updated on the investigation for a while, but eventually the trail went cold. He was likely living under a fake name in some country without an extradition treaty with the United States, spending whatever money he had managed to hide in offshore accounts. Sarah thought about him sometimes, wondered if he knew that his emergency stash had been found, if he regretted abandoning it, if he ever felt guilty about the people he had stolen from. She decided that people like Brennan probably never felt guilty. They only felt sorry for themselves when they got caught. 2 years after finding the money, Sarah was invited to speak at a community center in South Phoenix about entrepreneurship and overcoming obstacles. She stood in front of a room full of young people, mostly teenagers, mostly from low-income families like hers had been. She told them her story, not just about finding the money, but about the years of struggle before that, the sacrifices, the failures, the times she wanted to give up. She told them that success wasn't about luck or one big break. It was about showing up every day, doing the work, making the right choices, even when they were hard, especially when they were hard. A girl in the front row raised her hand. What was it like, finding all that money? Were you scared? Sarah thought about it. Yeah, I was scared. Not just of the danger, but of what the money might do to me. Money can change you if you let it. It can make you forget who you are, where you came from, what really matters. I think the real test wasn't finding the money. It was deciding what to do with it and making sure it didn't change the person I wanted to be. The girl nodded slowly, like she understood. Sarah still works at Martinez Auto Repair, though she doesn't have to anymore. She could retire, travel, do whatever she wants. But she loves the work, the smell of motor oil and tire rubber, the satisfaction of fixing something broken and making it run again. She loves the customers, the conversations, the connections. She loves being part of her community, being someone people can count on. The money gave her choices, but she chose to stay right where she was, doing what she loved, just with less worry and more ability to help others. Marcus graduated from community college and now works as a mechanical engineer for an aerospace company in Tempe. He still stops by the shop sometimes, helps out when Sarah's busy, catches up over coffee. They never talk much about that day they found the money, but it's always there between them, a shared experience that bonded them in a way nothing else could have. They both know how lucky they were, not just to find the money, but to handle it the right way, to not let it destroy them or their friendship. Sarah's mother passed away 3 years after the money was found, peacefully in her sleep, free of debt and worry for the first time in decades. At the funeral, Sarah stood at the graveside and thought about how her mother had never asked for anything, had worked 3 jobs to support Sarah and her siblings after their father got sick, had never complained or given up. The money had given Sarah the chance to ease her mother's burden in those final years, and for that she was grateful. It didn't make the loss hurt less, but it meant her mother's last years had been better, easier, and that mattered. On the 5-year anniversary of finding the money, Sarah was closing up the shop when she noticed something tucked under the windshield wiper of her truck. A note, handwritten on plain paper. She unfolded it carefully. It read, "Thank you for doing the right thing. Some of the investors you helped get their money back were people I knew. You could have kept it all, but you didn't. The world needs more people like you." The note wasn't signed. Sarah looked around the empty parking lot, but there was no one there. She folded the note and put it in her wallet, where she still keeps it today. She went home that night to her modest house in the same neighborhood where she grew up. She could have bought a mansion in Paradise Valley or Scottsdale, but she chose to stay close to her roots, close to her community. She made dinner, watched some TV, went to bed. It was an ordinary evening, the kind she had lived through thousands of times before. And that was exactly how she wanted it. The money had been a disruption, a moment of chaos and possibility, but what she valued most was the ordinary life she had built, the work she did, the people she helped, the stability and peace she had fought so hard to achieve. Sometimes late at night, when she can't sleep, Sarah thinks about that rusted Caprice sitting in the impound lot, about the moment she decided to bid on it, about how close she came to just walking away. She thinks about all the tiny decisions that led to that moment and all the decisions that came after. She thinks about the man who bid $400 on a rust bucket and found $39 million, and the woman who had to decide what kind of person she wanted to be when faced with that choice. She's proud of the choice she made, not just turning in the money, but everything that came after, the way she chose to live, the person she chose to remain. The story of the mechanic who found $39 million became a local legend in Phoenix. People still talk about it, embellishing details, arguing about what they would have done in Sarah's position. Most people say they would have kept it, hidden it, taken the risk. Sarah knows they're probably lying to themselves. It's easy to say what you would do when it's hypothetical. It's much harder when it's real, when you're standing in your shop at 3 in the morning, staring at a mountain of cash and trying to figure out what to do. She doesn't judge people for saying they would keep it. She just knows that for her, the choice to turn it in was the only choice she could live with, and that's made all the difference. Martinez Auto Repair is still there on the east side of Phoenix, still fixing cars, still serving the community. Sarah's there most days, under a hood, hands covered in grease, doing the work she loves. The sign outside is new, bright and professional, but the business is the same. Honest work, fair prices, treating people right. That was true before the money, and it's true after. The money changed her circumstances, but it didn't change who she was. And in the end, that's the real story. Not about finding $39 million in a rust bucket, but about finding out who you are when faced with an impossible choice, and choosing to be someone you can be proud of. Sarah Martinez chose well, and she's still choosing every day to be that person. That's worth more than any amount of money could ever be.